Hello, I'm Christoph, your guide to the brain and nervous system, and today we are talking about the synapse. We're going to get right into the drawing. Here's a brain cell. Its body, its dendrites are over here. Got a bunch of dendrites, and then it's got one tail coming out. Here's another cell. It's got a bunch of dendrites. The important thing for this video, this little space is the synapse. We are going to zoom in on the synapse today. Big picture, there's a cell getting a bunch of inputs from a bunch of other cells, telling it either to fire the axon, send the information out, or to not fire. Hold it down. The end of the axon opens up little gates on the membrane of the cell and lets out chemicals. Not just any chemicals though. Neurochemicals. Neurotransmitters. So the synapse is a space between an axon and whatever it's connecting to. An axon can connect to the body of another cell. The dendrites that are like antennas trying to take in information. You can just connect to the environment that all brain cells are in. The important thing is there's an axon sending something out through these little channels that open up. Bits of chemical live in the synapse, and some of them are taken in to nearby cells. And there are many different kinds of chemicals. Different neurons are putting out different kinds of chemicals. And then depending on where they go, depending on what their target is, the same chemical can have different effects. So a chemical might have one effect when an axon is releasing it here to another neuron in the brain. But it could have quite another effect. If there's an axon that starts up here, goes out here, has an end that releases onto a muscle, then it's going to have a different effect. Or one chemical, when it touches the heart, might make the heart speed up. But when the same chemical touches the stomach, it makes the stomach slow down. This is the rich world of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Little word here. The same chemical neurons are using here to communicate with each other in the brain, where it's called a neurotransmitter, could be called a hormone if it goes into the bloodstream and then gets transmitted all over the body. The difference is a neurotransmitter is pretty specific. It's targeting one other cell. A hormone is going into the bloodstream and kind of going everywhere. It's sending messages to a lot of different places, and it takes a while to get there. Neurotransmitters fast, hormones slow. But it could be the same chemical. It's the exact same shape. It's got all the same elements in it. It's the same chemical. It's just a hormone if it's acting slowly through the blood, and a neurotransmitter if it's acting quickly from cell to cell. I digress. The first chemical I want to talk about is monoamine oxidase. Monoamine oxidase cleans up the synapse. In our synapse, the axon has sent out some chemicals. Monoamine oxidase is one of the chemicals whose job it is to go into the synapse and clean up. Goes in, gets rid of that. Goes in, gets rid of that. If it weren't for chemicals like monoamine oxidase, oxidase just means it helps get rid of monoamines. If it weren't for these, the chemicals would stay in the synapse. It would be like the axon was sending the same message over and over and over and over again. But it doesn't want to do that. It wants to send one discrete little message. Fire. Right now we need the right arm to move. Right now, I need to let you know that there is currently a green frog in front of the eyes. If that lingers there, it keeps sending the message long after the green frog has hopped away, long after I needed to move my right hand. We need to clear that stuff out so that each message can be very specific to our needs right now. Monoamine oxidase helps clear things out and helps make it so the message system can keep sending its messages at the right time. Neurotransmission happens in the synapses. Monoamine oxidase does an important role in neurotransmission by cleaning out the synapse. If we're talking about neurotransmission, we gotta talk about neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals themselves. A lot of different kinds, we'll just talk about a few. One important one is GABA. GABA, it's all over the brain. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. Everybody just calls it GABA for obvious reasons. This one is a brain chemical. In the brain, GABA is the chemical that axons send out to tell other cells not to fire. They are inhibiting the firing of other axons. Kind of hit the brakes on a certain system in the brain. Listen, no danger here, we don't need to run. Listen, the thing we're looking at is green, not red. We don't need to activate the red system part of the brain. GABA is what's doing that. Brain inhibitor. If it weren't for inhibition, we'd just be doing wild, crazy stuff and hallucinating all the time. Inhibitors keep things clear. They say, no, not that. There are also excitatory chemicals. GABA's counterpart in the brain is glutamate. Like GABA, glutamate is only in the brain, and its only job is to tell other cells to fire. It's the brain excitor. What says, yes, we're looking at something red in the middle of the visual field. Activate the red in the middle of the visual field system in the brain. Glutamate says fire. GABA says don't fire. Other neurotransmitters do one thing in the brain, but something different in the rest of the body. An important neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the muscle chemical. Muscle movement. When there's a neuron in the brain sending its axon out to this muscle, and it tells this muscle to flex, the chemical that it's sending to make that happen is acetylcholine. Out of the end of an axon, acetylcholine shoots onto muscle fiber. Not onto another brain cell, right onto the muscle. Right now, there are a bunch of neurons sending acetylcholine to my lips, my tongue, my lips, getting so many thousands of messages a minute to be able to make all the sounds that I'm making in this particular way. It's happening through neurotransmission of acetylcholine to the muscles in my face and mouth. But acetylcholine doesn't just tell muscles to move. It also does something in the brain. When it lands on a neuron in the brain, that neuron knows to do something different in response. It helps the brain with attention, wakefulness, memory. So acetylcholine on muscles makes them move, but in the brain it has to do with attention, wakefulness, and memory. For folks who have Alzheimer's, there is less acetylcholine in the brain. Part of what seems to cause memory loss in Alzheimer's is a lack of this chemical in the synapses of the brain. Without this chemical sending messages in neural systems, neural networks that have to do with memory and wakefulness, memory doesn't happen. Wakefulness doesn't happen. More neurotransmitters. Let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine, you've perhaps heard of it. It has to do with learning, attention, reinforcement. You did a good job. Here's a cookie. You finished your homework. Here's a chocolate bar. You did your chores. Go ahead and play video games for 10 minutes. Dopamine is what gets released at those moments of reward. Dopamine establishes what is rewarding for us and helps us remember it and helps us do it more. It's also, as you might imagine, a big part of addiction. The release of dopamine by axons establishes stronger connections. It kind of tells the brain, yes, this, do it again. We can end up establishing a network that really rewards certain addictive behaviors. There are substances that release a lot of dopamine that we really want to get. So dopamine's not good or bad. We need to learn. We need to be reinforced in certain things so that we have good habits. Dopamine's the habit chemical. Some habits are good. Some habits hurt us. Now, a lack of dopamine, the habit chemical, has been associated with Parkinson, low attention, schizophrenia. It coordinates motor behavior, and that's part of why it's associated with Parkinson's, which is a motor disorder. Dopamine in a certain part of the brain, the basal ganglia, helps coordinate motor behavior so that our motions are smooth. The parts of the basal ganglia know that when they get dopamine, it's about motor function. Other parts of the brain get dopamine and use it to establish these kind of reward or habit loops. Outside the brain, dopamine has another function. In the gut, in the enteric nervous system. We have another video about all the divisions of the nervous system. Brain and spinal cord, the somatic nervous system, which radiates out through the body. The autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, rest and digest. And then there's the enteric nervous system, which is everything in the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, the rectum. In that system, dopamine is pretty important. The enteric nervous system pretty much just uses dopamine and serotonin to tell its cells what sensations are happening, what motions need to happen in the digestive system. Dopamine is a gut transmitter. Next, we'll talk about norepinephrine. Norepinephrine with a PH. If you had to boil what norepinephrine does in the brain down to one word, it would be vigilance. The focusing of awareness, the emotional regulatory systems, emotional control loops. It also plays a role in brain development, the actual structural movement and placement of brain cells. When we are changing brain cells, we're hooking this up over here, we're strengthening this connection, we're going to pull back those, we don't need that connection anymore. That's called learning. When you learn something, your brain cells are moving into a new position, or they're strengthening a connection, or they're making a new connection. Oh, I never knew that this idea that's contained in these brain cells is connected to that one. Let's build a literal physical connection between brain cells. All that kind of construction work in the brain is carried out through norepinephrine. Norepinephrine, we need to grow more, to scale back. Different cells take norepinephrine as a message to do different things depending on where they are in the system. But It's all about vigilance, establishing attention, emotional control, and it's about learning, changing the structure so that we make new connections. If there's a decrease in norepinephrine, ADHD can happen. It's associated with hyperactivity, and it's associated with depression, because we have less emotional regulation when there's less norepinephrine activating these emotional regulatory systems. It also organizes movement, which also bears on ADHD, hyperactivity, and depression when there isn't enough juice for the movement regulating systems to be communicating with each other effectively. Maybe you move less because you're depressed, maybe you move more because you're hyperactive. Norepinephrine is what mediates that. And norepinephrine does something different outside the brain. In mammals, norepinephrine speeds up the heart rate. That's the autonomic nervous system, which is about fight or flight. So it is a heart rate, speeder upper. You can't talk about norepinephrine without talking about epinephrine. Epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. Adrenaline. Similar to norepinephrine, it is a fight or flight chemical. Helps speed up the heart rate. Epinephrine is more powerful, more targeted. Norepinephrine, there's kind of a slow drip through the body. Sometimes it increases when we need to fight or flight. Epinephrine gets released when it is serious tiger chasing us time. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine are all catecholamines. Catecholamines, all three: dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. The catecholamines are the neurotransmitters, hormones that mediate the fight or flight response. Make sure that the heart is beating quick, that the gut is slowing down. That's what dopamine does. It's slow down the gut. While epinephrine and norepinephrine are like, we need the blood pressure, we need the heart rate. Get those eyes dilated. We're fighting, we're flighting. Catecholamines. Time to talk about serotonin. Serotonin, like dopamine, is an emotion chemical. It regulates mood, it regulates appetite, aggression, arousal, respiration, and pain perception. It has a role in keeping us in a wakeful state. When there are changes in serotonin, obsessive compulsive disorder, tics, schizophrenia may result. If there's a big decrease in serotonin, that's associated with depression. In connection with its function of regulating breathing and wakefulness, sometimes it happens that serotonin gets eaten up, like monoamine oxidase does. It gets eaten up by something too fast, so it doesn't get a chance to hang out in the synapse long enough to send the messages it needs to send. That messes with our breathing and our wakefulness and can cause sleep apnea, negative effect on our breathing during sleep, or tragically, it's the cause of sudden infant death syndrome. Infants weren't getting enough oxygen. Normally, serotonin would activate those systems that tell the system, we're not getting enough oxygen. We got to roll over, get more oxygen. If the serotonin is getting cleaned out of the synapse too quickly, then it's not sending that important message that we need more oxygen. So serotonin, basic life functions. Also called vegetative life functions, because even when we're in a vegetative state, we're breathing and our heart is beating, even if we're not thinking. And mood, aggression, arousal, that sort of thing. Now, we're already talking about serotonin in the synapse getting eaten up too quickly and how that can be a problem. There's a drug for that. SSRI. SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We talked about how things like monoamine oxidase can go in there and clean things up. Another way that we make sure that the synapse is ready to receive new messages, not sending a message too long, is after sending something out, the axon actually takes it back in to reuse the next time it needs to send out a message. And that's what neurons do with serotonin. They take it back up. That's reuptake. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, stop the cell from taking serotonin back in, which helps us have more serotonin in our synapses. We know that decrease in serotonin is associated with depression, so if we can keep more serotonin in the synapse, that can cause the symptoms of depression to decrease. So SSRIs are one of the antidepressants. And SSRIs aren't just antidepressants. Their effect on various serotonergic systems can target a lot of different conditions and disorders. Similar to SSRIs, there's another antidepressant that does kind of the same thing. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. SSRIs keep the axon from taking back the serotonin, so it stays in there. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors inhibit monoamine oxidase, so it can't go in there and delete the serotonin. So it's just another way to keep serotonin in there to help combat depression and other serotonin-related disorders. These are both a certain kind of chemical called serotonergic agonists. What does agonist mean? It means it's good for serotonin. You're taking an SSRI, you're taking a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, you're getting more serotonin there. It's good for serotonin. Agonist, agonist. And there are also chemicals that are antagonists. We might take an antagonist to keep neurotransmitters, hormones out, to get them out of the synapse, to make sure that some message isn't getting across. Botox is an antagonist. An acetylcholine antagonist. We put Botox into places where we don't want wrinkles. When axons are trying to send acetylcholine onto the muscles in our face, it says, nope, don't do that. So we can't move the face. That means there ain't gonna be any wrinkles. That's an example of an antagonist. All this talk about SSRIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, antidepressants, agonists, antagonists, that's all psychopharmacology. Psychopharmacology. Psycho means psychological, having to do with the mind, the brain. Pharma, as in pharmacy, drugs. Psychopharmacology is drugs that affect the mind, that affect the mood, our feelings, our stories about ourselves, psychological disorders. There are agonists and antagonists for all of these neurotransmitters and all the other kinds of neurotransmitters. Sometimes the body is producing its own agonists and antagonists. We send in agonists and antagonists to tweak the messaging that's going through the nervous system. That's psychopharmacology. And it can be really, really helpful. And on a kind of a fun note, the blood-brain barrier. There is a system through which the brain keeps certain chemicals from getting in, chemicals that might mess things up. Effective psychopharmacology has to get through that blood-brain barrier. Well, how does it do it? To know the answer to that, we get to zoom in to what the blood-brain barrier is. We've got neurons. It's connected to thousands of other neurons. It's got to get a blood supply. Have you gotten your recommended supply of blood today? Don't forget about blood. There's little veins bringing blood into the cell. Isn't that nice? Tiny, tiny little veins. We've talked a lot about neurons, but it's time to talk about glial cells. There are a bunch of different kinds of glial cells. Myelin cells that help things move quickly along the axon are one type that we talked about in the neuron video. There's an astrocyte, which means star-shaped. So there are star-shaped cells that live throughout the nervous system. And one thing they do is bind to blood vessels that are going throughout the nervous system. And they pull them or make them go into loop-de-loops. So here's a blood vessel, and it's being kind of tugged on by this glial cell. And the glial cells cleverly pinch the blood vessel like you would put a kink in a hose. And that constriction is the blood-brain barrier. You got this toxin molecule flowing through your blood, and it's going for your brain. But the heroic glial cell has kinked the hose so that it can't get through. So that's the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier. The which makes it so that, psychopharmacologically speaking, all of these neurotransmitters, or most of them, get through that kink, but certain bad things that we don't want to get into our synapses or our nervous system are kept from getting there. In review, in the synapse, an axon sends out chemicals. This is neurotransmission. The chemicals are neurotransmitters. Sometimes we call them hormones if they're going into the blood. There are several different kinds that either excite cells or tell cells to stop. They have to do with getting our muscles to move. They have to do with producing our mood, with teaching the brain, changing how the brain connects, establishing habits. There are drugs we can take through psychopharmacology that will act as agonists or antagonists and change how much of a chemical is in the synapse, which will change our mood, our movement, our symptoms, and our behaviors. And this psychopharmacology acts over the blood-brain barrier. That, in a nutshell, is the synapse and neurotransmission. I hope you've enjoyed. I'm Christoph, your guide to the brain and nervous system.